up from where we left off. Where we left off before was we had essentially deployed a sort of static front-end code, but it wasn't backed by anything. So this time we're going to actually back our front-end code with an API that will store the to-dos. Essentially, we're going to store the to-dos in a Dynamo DB database, which is a NoSQL database, and we're going to run the code, in this case Python code, to access the Dynamo DB and expose an API through Elastic Beanstalk, which is Amazon's sort of code-only way of deploying API code. So the first step here is we're going to go into Dynamo DB, and we're going to create the table to hold our to-dos. So we create a table. The table is going to be called to-dos, and ID is the primary key. And then, let's see what else here is. Basically everything else default settings, and to-dos, create. Okay, so we essentially now have our to-dos table. It's empty, right? The next step is we're going to write some code. Now in this case, instead of writing code, I'm going to skim through it briefly. But, and this is sort of outside the scope of this. This is basically the Python code. But let's look at it briefly, and then, again, I don't want to dwell on it. You can look at the code. It's linked in the story. Generally, what the code consists of is there's two files that we're going to actually use to upload into Elastic Beanstalk. One is the code itself, and that's going to be this one. And it's not super long. It's basically uses the Python uses a Python library called Botto3, which is Amazon's basically AWS integration library. And we're using Flask, which is a lightweight way of building APIs using Python. And we basically are exposing, again, not looking at the code too carefully, but we're exposing a /todos, which is returns all the to-dos. With a get, we're doing a post on to-dos to create new to-dos, and then we're going to call delete with to-dos and an ID, delete to-dos. So that's basically the sketch of the code. And the other file that we use to deploy is called requirements.txt, which is, these are all the dependencies for the project. And the way this gets generated, there's specifics around this that I'm not going to get into, but this is somewhat automated, the way this file gets created. It's a very Python thing. So again, I want to get bogged down in that. So these are the two files that we're going to end up using when we build our backend code on Elastic Beanstalk. Okay, so let me get rid of this. Okay, so we created our table. What we need to do now is we're going to go to Elastic Beanstalk and create our Elastic Beanstalk application. So go here, create application, and we're going to call this application to-dos are us-API, and we are going to choose a platform. We're going to use Python here, and we are going to upload our code, and we're going to choose a file. So we need to create the file first. So if you clone the repo here, you're going to see this in your folder. There's two files we need to add to a zip file. So we're going to go zip install, and we're going to include both application py and requirements.txt. And so now I have a zip file. So now I have that zip file, I'm going to choose that file. There it is. And that's it. So hit create application. Now behind the scenes, what this is doing is essentially creating an EC2 instance. It's creating a security group. It's creating an S3 bucket to hold my images, right? It's probably creating some roles so it can now manage all this infrastructure. And what we'll do is we'll take a peek at some of those briefly. This is going to take like another 10 minutes. So I'm going to pause the video and we'll come back and we'll poke around and see what got built. Later, it spun up the environment, right? So I'm going to just poke around a little bit and see what it did. One thing it did was, if you go to, and we haven't really talked about EC2, but basically EC2 are basic little Linux boxes, or Windows boxes for that matter. It actually spun up an EC2 instance for us to host our code. Why can't I spell EC2? And you will see there's a running instance now. So this is basically what's basically running our little web application. It also created, if I go to IAM, so IAM, it also created some roles. In particular, it created this Beanstalk. Let me see if I can scroll this wide, make this bigger. It created the EC2 role. So this is essentially the role that is assigned to that EC2 container, and that's how that user gains access. Whoever's, whatever this role is the permissions that that app has, right? It also created the service role it uses internally, so it can now gain access to your environment, right? And it looks like it also created these other ones, elastic load balancing and auto scaling roles for us. The one that we're going to mess around with actually is this EC2 role, and we might as well do that right now, because right now our EC2 instance does not have access to that Dynamo DB table, and as such it can't, it basically won't work. Right? Now, actually, the way we're going to do this instead is we're going to create a new policy. We're going to create a policy called, well, okay, first of all, it is a Dynamo DB policy. Dynamo DB. And if you were to look at the code, what we do is we use 3 operations. We do a scan to list the tables. To write the tables, we actually call put item. And to delete entries out of the table, we call delete item. So those are the 3 API endpoints we're calling. And we need to specify which table we want to touch. In this case, we're interacting with a table. And this is in US East 1. And the table we're dealing with to-dos, right? And so we created a policy that will allow us to do, well, basically do those, actually you see it in JSON probably better than, basically we can do put, delete, and scan on the to-dos table. Okay, so review policy, and we call this policy, let's call this to-dos are us API. It's basically the policy that will be used by that. And create policy. Yes. The next step, now that we have a policy, we go to the role, EC2 role, and we want to attach a policy, and we want to attach our customer managed one. And it's this one. Okay, so we just gave rights to that EC2 instance to that to-dos table. There's one other set, so that was the next thing I wanted to mess with. The last thing I want to look at here is actually in the code. Let me bring it up real quick. There is one entry in here that's relevant. If you were looking the application PY, you will see that one of the things I pull out of here is I need to know the region of the Dynamo DB database in this, when I basically connect to Dynamo DB here. And so the way we're getting it is through an environment variable called region. So what we need to do is go to our Elastic Beanstalk, and we need to provide our app an environment variable to run. So let's see if I can figure this out. Okay. this is the app, and I want to go to its configuration, and I believe it's under the software, and there is an entry called environment properties. And one of the environment properties I'm using is called region. That was something I picked. And US East -1. US East 1. Okay. Apply. Now, when I apply an environment variable, it basically has to restart the service. So I'm going to pause for a second and let this come back up. Or two for it to restart. And let's go ahead and test it. I actually did cheat and validated it does work, but let me show you how it works. So here's the URL right now. So I copy that URL. Okay, copy. And then I use a tool. In this case, I'm using Postman for doing the testing of my APIs. And I already did this earlier. I basically pasted it into here. I'm doing a GET request against that URL, then /todos. Right? And if I do that, I don't have any to-dos yet, so this is expected. Then if I want to create a to-do, and again, I did this a minute ago, so let me go here. I'll cheat. Here I'm doing a post on to-dos. I'm telling it it's of content type application JSON, and I have a name called, says go for a walk. And if I post that, you can see that I was successful, and it came back with a response of an ID and a name, right? So if I go back to my get now, I actually have a single to-do. And then if I want to delete a to-do, I grab a copy of the ID and I paste it at the end here. I'm doing a delete on to-dos /ID with no body. Don't even need a header actually. I should be able to just hit send, and there I delete my to-do. And if I go back to my to-dos, I should have no to-dos. Wait a second, I thought I deleted that to-do. Okay, I'm gonna try one more time. Of course, it always does something stupid. So if I go to to-dos, delete, get myself all tangled up on this. This is a delete on to-dos and send. Okay. Okay, and if I go to get, well, I must be, I think I'm actually posting instead of deleting. I guess I was confusing myself. Okay, well, either way, you can delete these. I mean, I'm not going to do it now. I don't want to spend all this time on this video deleting them. I'm going to double check. I'm going to pause the video and double check to make sure I'm not confused. But basically, I should be able to send deletes to those, and it should be deleting. And then we need to do still the front end API. The front end code needs to be updated. So let me pause the video for a second, clean this up, and then I'll go to the front end code. Did actually go do deletes the way I expected to, and they all deleted fine. I must have been clicking on post instead of deletes. Okay, so let me regroup, and then we'll look at the front end code, and then we'll have basically be done with this video. So give me a second. I'm going to get myself organized for the front end code. Back. So ran into a wrinkle. Turns out that Elastic Beanstalk out of the box only supports HTTP, not HTTPS, in the configuration where you have a single instance. We didn't do anything with load balancers or anything in our example. And it turns out you can do HTTPS, right? You can configure your Elastic Beanstalk environment load balancer to terminate HTTPS, and there's some steps, and we'll go through them. But the key here is the only way to terminate it is to actually have a load balancer, which we have not configured. So the first step in all of this, maybe the first thing we'll do is let's go ahead And we're going to actually create a endpoint called API, right? todosrs.com. And so what we need is we need a certificate for that. So let's do that first. So, and sort of flying by the seat of my pants, to be honest here. So certificate manager. We already have something already in place for todosrs.com, but we actually now need another certificate. Request a certificate. And this time it's going to be called API todosrs.com. API todosrs.com. Okay. And we hit next to make sure you get the right API. Right. So that's how we're going to serve up our API. And we're going to do DNS validation. And don't need to do tags. Confirm. And then it's waiting for us to validate it. Create the record. Create. And then I'm going to pause the video for a second. This takes a minute, so let me pause the video. So now my API that todosrs.com is issued, right? Next step is go back to Elastic Beanstalk, and we go into our app environment, go to configuration, and we go down to capacity, and so we want to change this to a load balanced scenario. And we really don't want 4 instances. I guess I could just leave it at 1. So we're going to try to just do 1 instance, but with a load balancer. We'll leave everything else alone. Everything else looks fine. Let me double check, make sure I'm not missing something. Scaling triggers, just we're not doing, I mean, we only have 1 load, I mean, time-based. Okay, I think we're good. Hit apply. Now I'm going to probably, yeah, it's fine. I'm going to pause the video. This is going to take a few minutes. Now, took a few minutes, and now we have, let's just do a quick check. If you go to events, you can kind of see what it did. Scroll through the events. You can see that one of the things it created an auto scaling group, which allows me to spin up, have it automatically spin up more servers. In this case, it's really not going to do anything because I set it to 1. It also created a load balancer. See if you can see that in the logs. Created load balancer. Create a new security group for that load balancer, right? So basically what it did was it just created a load balancer in a auto scaling group to support spinning up more than 1 instance of the server. Okay, so now that we've got a load balancer, we need to enable it for HTTPS, which was the whole exercise here. So you hit edit under load balancer, and if you go up here, you can see add listener. We want to listen on port 443, and which is HTTPS. And the instance port, though, our web server is still running on port 80, right? And it's just run on HTTP. So the listener is the load balancer's listener. Instance is the actual web servers we're running, and we're still running on port 80. The certificate, there's our API, and hit add. Now this may take a minute. Yeah, I'm going to pause the video for a second. Wait till this is done. So it took another few minutes, and now it went ahead and configured. It looks like it configured. See if it actually shows me what it configured. Basically updated the load balancer. Doesn't really say what it did, but I did check somewhere else. I see that the security group that the load balancer is behind has now got HTTPS on it. So the last step here before we can validate this is we need to go to DNS and point our API DNS entry to the load balancer. So let me go to Route 53. So there's a lot more steps here than I thought, to be honest. Hosted zones, to do RS. Okay, so now we need to create a record set of API. It is an alias, and hopefully we can find a load balancer here. So I would have expected to see API. I was hoping to see API. Okay, I'm going to probably have to end up troubleshooting here because I was really hoping to see I was hoping to see our classic API, classic load balancer here, and it's not showing up. Wait, just took a minute, I guess. Okay, there's my classic. Okay, so I guess it did work, just was slow. So I'm taking basically my API and I'm pointing it at the load balancer to create, and wow, let's see if it works. If not, I'll have to troubleshoot. HTTPS API todos are us.com/todos. Wow, it worked. So now I've got a secure API, not an insecure API. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video and go back to focus on the front end code again. So give me a second to get reorganized. Good news, it does work. So I did check this all before doing this, but let's do it together. The first thing we need to do is we need to rebuild the app to use this API. So there's another branch called backend. So it's linked into the story. So if you pull down that branch and you install it, there's different code here. Basically, I don't really want to look at it too carefully, but it has the API actually uses the actual API. But the way you configure the actual endpoint is there's an environment variable here called React_app API, and you point it at the API that you're looking to use. In this case, it should be HTTPS API todos.rs.com. So I save that, and then I'm going to remove the build folder just to make sure that it really does get a build. Then I do npm run build. That will use the new code with the environment variable, generate a build directory, and a bunch of build files. And now we need to load that back up into S3 like we did previously, right? Replacing the static pages. So if I go to todors.com and I delete all these files, and we're going to definitely eventually have to automate all this because this is very tedious. We're going to upload. We're going to drag and drop. We're going to go to the build folder, select all the files, drag and drop them, upload the files. We need to do with the cache control headers. So let's see, we do all the files but static. We need to go to properties. thing. Okay, hang on, go back. I'm doing the wrong thing. Select all the files but static. Go to Action, change metadata. This one should be no store. And we change all those. Come on. And then we pick up all the static files, change metadata, select a key, cache control, and then I had to get it copied here, so let me copy it from here. This is essentially caching it indefinitely, or a year. Boom, boom, change. Okay, if we did it all right, we should be able to go to HTTPS todosrs.com, and there it is. And we can inspect network. I'm going to hit reload here. And you can see it's actually hitting the API to-dos, right? And it pulled down. There's just no data. So then let me add a go for a walk. I really should better say go to sleep. This took longer than I hoped. And if I hit reload, right, this is actual coming from the server now. And of course I can now delete my walk and still go to sleep. And delete that too, for that matter. So this is all finally all working. I've exposed the API. We wired it to a front end, and I think we're done for the video. Good night.